18 out of 19 nominees were approved, and the president got his selected cabinet. Ebrahim Raeisi, the new man at Iran's helm, suggested 19 prospective ministers to parliament. And after 5 days of discussions, MPs on Wednesday, the 25th of August, agreed on all but one, the nominee for Education Minister. Raeisi has 3 months to come up with another name to fill that seat. Iran's political scene is hardly devoid of actors, as a new foreign minister has already embarked on trips to secure foreign relations, beginning with Iraq, then Syria. It's a critical time in foreign relations as a 7th round of Vienna talks to revive the Iran nuclear deal are pending. But as Amir Abdullahian puts a face to Iran in the international arena, the country's less seen domestic scene is where a real shake-up is needed. I have 3 experts with conflicting opinions on the show today to share with you their views of the ministers having to deal with some of the country's most profound problems. To examine their backgrounds is to assess their prospects of delivering on promise. For that, stay with me, Leila Faramarzi, on Iran Today. The Defense, Intelligence and Foreign Ministers must get a direct approval from the leader as well as Parliament. Although our interviewee, Mr. Haqverdi, says an approved cabinet tends never to get disproved by the leader. He is optimistic about the new cabinet but knows they face an uphill challenge. Chair of the Parliamentary Education Committee, he shared his views at his office in Shahriyar of Tehran. What do you think of the Raeisi cabinet, and what's the greatest challenge you'd say they're facing?
We
are all hopeful about the cabinet that has been formed. We hope for change and that the problems that are hurting the country and the people will be resolved in the short, mid and long term. The biggest challenge facing the cabinet are the financial problems and budget deficits, economic woes and most importantly, the coronavirus pandemic. The daily death toll from the virus is high indeed. These are some challenges this government is facing.
Mr. Mirlohi is a reformist analyst. He worked closely even as deputy minister with the Khatami and Rouhani administrations. His views of the present people in power and their prospects in overcoming problems aren't as optimistic as Mr. Haqverdi. Mankind's always aspiring to improvement. Would you say you've worked with the Khatami and Rouhani administrations? Looking at the Raeisi cabinet now, would you say that the country has excelled?
We are generating power in such hard times and exporting it to Iraq, but we can't pay the revenues to buy medicine. We wanted to pay the dollars to Switzerland to buy medicine for COVID-19, but as you know, we couldn't. We couldn't spend the dollars to buy medicine from Japan and South Korea. We lost our share from the COVAX program because of a lack of funds. These are some facts that prevent us from being optimistic. This cabinet needs to demonstrate its ability in action. It needs to show it can make scientific and logical decisions based on the opinions of experts.
5 of the president's proposed ministers failed to gain Mr. Haqverdi's vote of confidence, 2 of them being the Minister of Energy and the proposed Minister of Education, who didn't get it all together. That would be Mr. Baghgoli. I asked why.
Mr. Baghgoli is an honorable man. He has a specialization in the field of education. He's a true scientist, but he's not familiar with the administrative structure of the Ministry of Education. He didn't recognize the systems and the subsystems of the ministry as a bureaucratic system. Therefore, he wasn't familiar with the challenges posed against the Ministry of Education and the problems facing the administrative structure of the ministry. He didn't belong to the ministry.
The Minister of Energy is Ali Akbar Mehrabian. He has outlined his major plans to include providing for 10,000 megawatts capacity for new power plants to boost the country's power generation capacity by 35 to 40 gigawatts over the next 4 years. Mehrabian says he wants to improve the business environment in the water and electricity industry through maximum interaction with the private sector. Constructing new power plants will focus on the establishment of renewable plants to save more fuel while protecting the environment. Mehrabian said, "Saving fuel from renewable power plants is a great and permanent treasure because renewable sources are sustainable and free. The investment needed to build 10,000 megawatts of such power plants would be about $6 billion, while the constructed power plants will save $3 billion of fuel every year." Our MP says why Mehrabian didn't win his vote of confidence in spite of his appealing plans.
ببینید آقای مهرابیان سابقش تو وزارت صنایع معادن بوده. من گفتم اگه قرار بودیش.
Well, you see, Mr. Mehrabian has experience in the Ministry of Industries and Mines. I said if there's an insistence that he has to become a minister, he should have been picked for the Ministry of Mines and Industries where he has worked before. His education wasn't compatible with a job at the Ministry of Energy. The plans he proposed had many flaws, which I criticized in my speech.
الان میشه گفت وزارت نیرو سیاسی ترین وزارتخونه ما حتی از وزارت کشور سیاسی تر شد.
We can say that the Ministry of Energy is the most politicized ministry in the cabinet, even more so than the Interior Ministry. We witnessed that in Mr. Rouhani's administration and continue to see that now. Instead of asking the Minister of Energy how he will generate 30,000 megawatts of power, how he will manage the circulation of urban water and wastewater, how he intends to manage water resources, and how he is going to control the energy supplies, they asked him whether he would take Isfahan's water to Yazd or Khuzestan's water to Isfahan.
I asked, what's the greatest of all challenges the country faces? Do tell of the challenges the new cabinet faces.
واقعیتش زیربنای اقتصاد الان خب از
In fact, the most important issues which are threatening the economy and the people's livelihood are the coronavirus pandemic and drought. Other issues have lost their urgency. We, as reformists, are always pushing for civil freedoms, personal rights, privacy, elections, media, culture, art, and so on. But right now, all of us are unanimous in believing that the most urgent thing at the moment is the people's livelihood.
بحث عمدمون بالاخره تأمین ارز برای مملکت.
The main priority for us is attracting foreign currency to the country. We're living under sanctions, but all economic experts agree that our main challenge isn't the sanctions, but proper management. The sanctions are posing problems, but not all challenges stem from the bans. With the coordination that exists in the Cabinet's economic team and the viewpoints of some of them who are economic experts, we hope that we can soon witness positive developments for the economy.
The economy is suffering what remains of an influx of liquidity, inflation and high prices alongside unemployment or pseudo-employment and low wages. But at least one of the solutions proposed has had an opposite effect. That's forcing a lid on prices, which resulted in lower production by chicken farmers and others. I asked about rooting out the cause of the problems instead. Mr. Abdullah, he is editor-in-chief at Tasnim news agency where he received us. His interviews have the beauty of the factual, analytical view of a media man. He's an asset to have on the show.
در حوزه اقتصاد و اینها حداقل در کوتاه مدت
There's no doubt that some steps will be taken with regard to the economy. For instance, basic goods have been going up in price. The main reason for that has been mismanagement. For example, they might have imported some goods but disregarded other crucial ones, or something might be left at the customs and wouldn't be cleared. Things like this have happened. Part of these issues will be taken under control, and I believe good things will happen. Speaking of energy, I think in managing power, water, and so on, there will be good news as far as the cabinet and its management are concerned.
The president has high hopes for the country. Now my question is, has he largely chosen some of his people based on their glittering records, or because he has working plans to bring out the best in them to implement his projects? Raeisi held judicial positions for decades before he was appointed Chief Justice in 2019, just before the country was uniformed with a principalist takeover of parliament in 2020.
نکته دوم این که آقای رئیسی یک قابلیت
The second point is that Mr. Raeisi has the ability to build consensus and enjoys a certain amount of acceptance among the various spectrums who are determined to improve the situation in the country. Mr. Raeisi can use different views, approaches, and tastes at the same time. This is perhaps a distinctive feature of Mr. Raeisi compared to his fellow principalists.
I asked specifically about the Minister of Petroleum, Iran being a petropower and oil economy, present ministers formerly working with Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, and about the present first Vice President, Mokhber, who was formerly with the IRGC, Islamic Revolution Guard Corps. He was also, for the past 14 years, head of SETAD, which was along with him sanctioned by former US President Trump. That's where Mokhber also led efforts to produce Coviran Barakat, the country's first locally developed COVID-19 vaccine. By SETAD, I mean the executive headquarters of Imam Khomeini's directive.
این که آقای اوجی مثلا به عنوان وزیر نفت
Speaking about Mr. Oji as the Minister of Oil, I don't personally know him, and I think that there could be a better pick for the position. But the fact that Mr. Raeisi is in charge might be a welcome relief. There might be a minister in previous cabinets who can display better performance in later cabinets. For example, Mr. Islami was a minister in Mr. Rouhani's cabinet. He might not have had much to offer in that administration due to the general paradigm of the cabinet, but he might prove quite successful in Mr. Raisi's cabinet in the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran.
Since I made a mention of the COVID-19 pandemic, it's worth mentioning that as the country battles a fifth wave of the disease with official daily death tolls surpassing 650 and 700, Bahram Ainollahi has been approved as health minister.
در بحث واکسن هم ببینید خود ژاپن
Didn't Japan and others that imported vaccines from the US have problems? The leader of the Islamic Revolution said during the Vaccine Council session that we can import vaccines from anywhere in the world. But we remember the problems that arose from such dealings with the US and some European nations. We remember France's infected blood scandal, the trial for which lasted for several years. This means that they're not our friends.
Time for a short break. We'll be back in no time. Talking of factional tendencies, the first two proposed cabinets of Presidents Rouhani and Raisi were both presented to principalist-dominated parliaments. Controversial and heated as debates were in the 9th Parliament over whether to give Rouhani's choice the vote, most of his proposed ministers did win a good number of MP votes from a total of 284 votes cast. As for Raisi's roster of ministers, well, his is an administration factionally aligned with Parliament. And although preceded by heated discussion, his ministers got a vote of confidence in one go. All but one of them, that is. Below is a chart comparing the number of votes for and against given to Rouhani and Raisi ministers by Parliament or Majlis. A half of our narrative remains for after a quick media review. That will focus on President Raisi's pledge to fight corruption and revive Imam Khomeini's ideals in regaining the trust of the people. Do stay tuned for a look at what other news outlets are saying. Here's how they put it in words. Tasnim News quotes the president on fighting grounds of corruption. He underlines them, that's Ebrahim Raeisi, the president, who said people expect the administration to fight against corruption, stressing that all the ministers must try to fight the grounds of corruption in the country. Speaking in the first meeting of the 13th administration, the president said the people should feel progress and justice in affairs. Servants of the people in the administration should make every effort to solve the problems of the people night and day, emphasizing that today the best yardstick for justice is the rule of law. Raeisi said the rule of law should be considered as a principle, and whether the rule of law works with being revolutionary is affirmative. Pointing out that there are no deadlocks in the system, which features guardianship of the Islamic jurist, the president said, we should not get caught up in bureaucracy and administrative complications. People expect the government to fight against corruption. The Financial Tribune points to the importance of public trust. Need to deliver on pledges to restore public trust. Leader of the Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, stressed the need for the fulfillment of promises given to the nation to restore public trust and boost people's hope. If a pledge is made, it must be honored, because promising and not delivering leads to a lack of trust, he said in a meeting with President Ebrahim Raeisi and his cabinet on Saturday. That's been reported by leader.ir. He added that dates should be set for the pledges so that they can be pursued and fulfilled on time. If it is not possible to keep a promise due to problems, explain to the people and apologize, he said. The leader also called on the new government to adopt a people-oriented approach by showing modesty and sharing problems and their solutions with the public, and calling for their consultation and practical assistance. Mehr News makes a mention of allegiance to Imam Khomeini. Raeisi cabinet renew allegiance to Imam Khomeini's ideals. Iranian President Ebrahim Raeisi and members of the cabinet renewed allegiance to the high ideals of the late founder of the Islamic Republic, Imam Khomeini, at his mausoleum. In the event that took place on Thursday morning, August the 26th, with the custodian of Imam Khomeini's mausoleum, Hujjatul Islam wal Muslimin, Sayyid Hassan Khomeini, taking part, Ebrahim Raeisi paid tribute to the late founder of the Islamic Republic by placing a bouquet of flowers on his grave. The visit comes only one day after almost all of his proposed ministers were approved by the parliament. The ceremony, practiced traditionally by Iranian administrations on the first day of the formation of their cabinet, marks the practical start of the administration's work. That would be it for the news segment, but do stay tuned. Now for a little more on some Raeisi cabinet choices and their backgrounds. The president appointed Mohsen Rezai as his deputy for economic affairs. Rezai is a former commander-in-chief of the IRGC and current secretary of the Expediency Council. And he was a presidential hopeful again in 2021. For a uniquely important position, that of Interior Minister, Raeisi chose Ahmad Vahidi, who was Defense Minister to none other than Ahmadinejad. For Petroleum Minister, the President picked Javad Oji, who is a long-time executive and official in the oil and gas sector and has held several senior managerial positions in firms with ties to the Setad. The 54-year-old was also Deputy Petroleum Minister and Chief Executive of the National Iranian Gas Company for several years under Ahmadinejad. He has promised to apply an active attitude for bypassing sanctions and use of the private sector in exporting crude. He means to encourage foreign investment for exports in the mid and downstream sectors. Another minister tied to the Ahmadinejad administration is Rostam Qasemi, now Minister of Roads and Urban Development. Once leader of the Khatam al-Anbiya construction headquarters of the Revolution Guard, the 57-year-old was Petroleum Minister for the 2 final years of Ahmadinejad's era. He says he will strongly continue and pursue the National Housing Action Plan to provide affordable housing for lower classes. He stressed the importance of strengthening various sectors of transport, including land, air, sea, and rail. These will be on the agenda, and we will try to increase the share of transport in the country's gross domestic product.
When
Mr. Ahmadinejad's government took office, money was abundant. The price of oil jumped from $8 a barrel during Mr. Khatami's administration to $140 in Mr. Ahmadinejad's. We used to have considerable sources of foreign currency revenues. In 2012, we sold $119 billion worth of oil, gas condensates, and other products from Asaluye. Today, we have a positive international trade balance, meaning that we are exporting goods more than we are importing them.
For the country's economy to really pick up, there's got to be close cooperation and coordination between different ministries, with all productive ministries depending on foreign relations for imports and exports.
یه نکته دیگه که می‌خواستم بگم در راست اون
Another issue that could potentially be challenging is the coordination between the economic leaders in Mr. Raisi's cabinet. We have Mr. Mokhber, Mir Kazemi and Mohsen Rezai as economic managers. But this causes concern about who will be the economic coordinator in the cabinet. Because Mr. Mokhber had said that as an economic head, there must be some special authority given to him. Considering Mr. Rezai's background and the position he's appointed in now, he will have the same demands. Mr. Mir Kazemi's position in the planning and budget organization is also a crucial one. As a result, there is this concern that they may act without proper coordination.
To tackle the ailing economy, the president chose Ehsan Khandouzi, a researcher and university professor. That would be as finance minister. The 41-year-old became a member of parliament in 2020 as a representative for Tehran. In stressing the importance of economic growth as a priority, he said, "The main responsibility of the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs is to finance the government and ensure economic development using sustainable, safe, and low-risk methods." And for Trade Minister, Industry, Mining and Trade Minister, he picked Said Reza Fatemi Amin, who set short-term priorities for the ministry on the first day of his office. He did note that 36 new improvement programs have also been defined to be implemented along with the mentioned priorities. He wants to achieve an effective structure and mechanism for the management of industry and mining sectors and to complete the country's comprehensive trade system because, he said, completion of this system makes it possible to monitor the flow of production and distribution of goods and makes it possible to predict and make timely decisions. Realizing the importance of a meeting and cooperation with the Agriculture Minister for Market Regulation, I said the economy would depend on foreign relations as things go. Hossein Amir Abdullahian, the foreign minister, is a career diplomat specializing in West Asia. He's done stints in Iraq, Bahrain and Syria and aims to form an Asia-centric foreign policy. The 57-year-old was Deputy Foreign Minister for Arab and African Affairs for 5 years until 2016, among other roles. But as Vienna talks are dormant but still on, he stresses he will not escape the negotiating table.
بزرگترین مشکلی که دولت قبل داشت
The biggest mistake of the previous government was that it put all its eggs in the basket of the JCPOA. It believed that all problems will be resolved by signing the deal. That's why when Donald Trump withdrew from the accord, the entire building collapsed. There are emerging economic powers we can interact with. The leader of the Islamic Revolution has also advised the government not to tie the people's livelihoods to the issue of the JCPOA.
I believe if the JCPOA is restored and the problems surrounding the FATF and our transactions are resolved, considering the current situation in the world and what's been happening in Afghanistan, which is very unfortunate, especially the scenes at the Kabul airport, which were really heartbreaking, the US and Europe would learn the lesson that they no longer can sow division between the countries in the region to sell arms. This will provide a great opportunity for Iran to improve its situation in the region and cooperate with our neighbors better.
The President Ebrahim Raeisi is of like mind, as he vowed that his administration will pursue the removal of the sanctions by giving the nuclear deal a chance of revival, but without conditioning the country's economic growth to sanction lifting of Iran. This is while he assured Parliament that he would never row back in the slightest from his anti-corruption position to tolerate even the smallest instances of corruption. To tackle all his listed 30 problematic areas in the country's affairs, however, he called for cooperation among the people, government and Majlis as an indispensable imperative. That's it for today, but the new ministers have a whole 4-year tenure in which to fray their energy in service. And that's how long we've got to inspect their success in service. Thanks for watching us thus far. Do so each week at the same times to keep posted. Till next week, bye.